The proposition the rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown coffee shop as Sophia Blake stared at her laptop screen, watching her bank balance refuse to budge from its depressing two-digit number. Her graduate thesis in environmental engineering sat half-finished, buried under a mountain of bills she couldn't pay. The part-time tutoring jobs weren't cutting it anymore, and her student loans felt like quicksand, pulling her deeper with each passing month. She closed her laptop with a frustrated sigh, gathering her courage to face another rejection from the scholarship committee. That's when she noticed him, a man in an expensive charcoal suit sitting 3 tables away, studying her with intense dark eyes. There was something magnetic about his presence, the way he commanded attention even while sitting perfectly still. Damien Cross had built his tech empire from nothing, turning a small software startup into a billion-dollar corporation that revolutionized cloud computing. But now, at 32, he faced his greatest challenge yet: his grandfather's archaic will. The old man's final decree stated that Damien had to be married within 6 months to inherit the controlling shares of Cross Industries, or watch the company be sold to the highest bidder. He'd spent weeks researching potential candidates, women, who would understand the business nature of the arrangement, but something about the brunette with paint-stained fingernails and determination in her green eyes caught his attention. He'd watched her for 3 days, noting her routine, her struggles, her fierce independence, even in the face of obvious financial hardship. Damien stood, adjusting his tie as he approached her table. "Excuse me, are you Sophia Blake?" She looked up, startled. "Yes, but I don't think we've—" "My name is Damien Cross. I have a proposition that might interest you." He slid a business card across the small table. "I need a wife. You need money. I believe we can help each other." Sophia's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's purely business," Damien continued, his voice low and measured. "A 12-month contract marriage. You'd receive housing, expenses, and a substantial payment upon completion. In return, you'd attend social functions and maintain the appearance of a devoted wife." She laughed, a sound caught between disbelief and hysteria. "You're insane. You don't even know me. I know you're a graduate student at Portland State, studying environmental engineering. I know you work 3 part-time jobs and still can't make ends meet. I know you're brilliant. Your research on sustainable water systems caught my attention." He leaned back slightly. "And I know you're too proud to accept charity, but practical enough to consider a mutually beneficial arrangement." Sophia's mouth went dry. "How much?" $500,000? Plus living expenses and a generous allowance for clothing and personal needs. He paused. "It would be enough to finish your degree, pay off your debts, and start whatever kind of life you want afterward." The number hit her like a physical blow. It was more money than she'd see in 5 years of her projected career. It could change everything: her future, her family's situation, her ability to pursue her research without financial constraints. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you're not looking for love or trying to climb social ladders. You're practical, intelligent, and have your own goals that don't involve my money beyond this arrangement." His eyes softened slightly. "Because I think you're the only person who might actually be able to tolerate me for an entire year, despite everything." Sophia found herself almost smiling. "What makes you think I'd say yes to something so crazy?" Damien reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, setting it gently on the table between them. "Because sometimes crazy is the only solution that makes sense." The arrangement 3 weeks later, Sophia stood in the marble foyer of Damien's penthouse, clutching a single suitcase and wondering what alternate universe she'd stumbled into. The space was a monument to modern minimalism, all clean lines, expensive art, and windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city's skyline. It was beautiful, impressive, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Your room is down this hall," Damien said, his tone businesslike as he gestured toward the west wing. "We'll maintain separate spaces to avoid any ... complications, Mrs. Chen. My housekeeper has prepared everything you'll need." Sophia nodded, still processing the surreal nature of her situation. The contract they had signed was 23 pages of legal jargon that essentially boiled down to 1 year of pretending to be madly in love. with a man who treated emotions like a hostile corporate takeover. The first event is tomorrow night, he continued, checking his phone. A charity gala for the children's hospital. My assistant ordered appropriate attire. It should be in your closet. Appropriate attire? She repeated slowly. You mean you bought me clothes? It's a business expense. His dark eyes met hers briefly. This arrangement only works if you look the part of a tech billionaire's wife. Designer gowns, jewelry, that works. The next evening, Sophia barely recognized herself in the mirror. The emerald green gown hugged her curves perfectly. The diamond necklace at her throat probably cost more than her childhood home. When she emerged from her room, she found Damien waiting by the elevator, looking devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo. For a moment, something flickered in his expression: surprise. Perhaps even admiration, but it vanished so quickly. She might have imagined it. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. The gala was a whirlwind of introductions, champagne, and carefully choreographed affection. Sophia found herself surprisingly good at playing the role of the devoted newlywed, laughing at Damien's subtle jokes and allowing him to guide her through conversations with Seattle's elite. What surprised her more was how naturally he seemed to adapt to having her by his side. You're quite good at this, he murmured during a brief moment alone on the terrace, watching the city lights twinkle below it. Lying, she asked, accepting the glass of wine he offered. At being yourself. It's refreshing in this crowd of people trying so hard to impress each other. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the pretense fell away. Then Damien stepped back, the wall sliding back into place. We should return inside. As weeks passed, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings found them sharing coffee and the financial news, debating everything from market trends to environmental policy. Damien discovered that Sophia had opinions on everything and wasn't afraid to challenge him, something that hadn't happened in his boardroom for years. Evenings were reserved for their public appearances, gallery openings, corporate dinners, charity events. Each outing required them to play their parts more convincingly, standing closer, touching more naturally, sharing private smiles that began to feel less forced with each passing night. Your wife is charming, commented Patricia Morrison, the mayor's wife, during a particularly stuffy political fundraiser. How did you two meet? Sophia felt Damien's hand tighten on her waist as he launched into their rehearsed story about meeting at a conference on sustainable technology. She found herself adding details they'd never discussed, describing their fictional first date with surprising ease. When she glanced up at him, she caught something unguarded in his expression: wonder. Perhaps at how seamlessly she could weave their lie into something that sounded remarkably like truth. Later that night, as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse, the silence felt different somehow. Charged. Thank you, Damien said quietly as the doors opened. For what? For making this bearable, even enjoyable sometimes. Sophia felt her heart skip, a dangerous flutter that reminded her how carefully she needed to guard her feelings. This was business, nothing more. But as she watched him disappear into his wing of the penthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that the lines they'd so carefully drawn were beginning to blur in ways neither of them had anticipated. Unexpected feelings, the crisis hit on a Tuesday morning like a digital avalanche. Sophia was sketching architectural plans for a sustainable housing project when she heard Damien's voice echoing from his home office, sharp, controlled, dangerous. She'd never heard him sound quite like that before. What do you mean the servers are compromised? His words carried down the hallway. How extensive is the breach? Setting down her pencil, Sophia found herself drawn toward the commotion. Through the partially open door, she could see Damien pacing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, while his laptop displayed what looked like cascading error messages. Sir Marcus Webb, his head of security, appeared in the doorway looking pale. It's worse than we thought. They've accessed client data going back 3 years. Damien's face went white. Cross Industries built its reputation on ironclad security. For corporate clients, a data breach of this magnitude could destroy everything he'd worked for. Cancel all my meetings, he said, his voice deadly calm. Lock down every system we have. and get our legal team on conference call in 10 minutes. Sophia watched him for another moment, recognizing the controlled panic beneath his composed exterior. She'd seen that same look on her father's face when their family business nearly went under during the recession, the weight of knowing that hundreds of employees depended on decisions made in the next few hours. Without thinking, she knocked softly and entered the office. "Not now, Sophia," Damien said, without looking up from his computer. "This isn't part of our arrangement. Maybe not, but I might be able to help." He glanced at her sharply. "This is cybersecurity, not environmental engineering. Actually, it's systems analysis, and that's exactly what I do." She moved closer to his desk, studying the error logs on his screen. "Before I switched to environmental work, I spent 2 years in computer science. I know how to trace network intrusions." For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he gestured to the chair beside his desk. "Show me." The next 6 hours blurred together in a haze of code, coffee, and collaborative problem-solving. Sophia's fresh perspective helped identify security gaps that Damien's team had missed, while her experience with environmental data systems provided unexpected insights into protecting sensitive information. "There," she said, pointing to a pattern in the server logs. "The initial breach came through this subsidiary connection. The one your team assumed was secure because it handles lower-level operations." Damien leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers as he studied the screen. "You're right. We can isolate that pathway and rebuild the authentication protocols. It might contain the damage before it spreads to your primary clients, Sophia." Finished. Their eyes met across the glowing laptop screen, and something shifted between them. This wasn't the polished businessman and his contract wife. This was two minds working in perfect synchronization, each complementing the other's strengths. "Why didn't you tell me you could do this?" he asked quietly. "You never asked what I was capable of beyond looking pretty at charity events." The rebuke was gentle but pointed, and Damien had the grace to look chagrined. "I underestimated you. Most people do." By midnight, they'd successfully contained the breach and implemented new security measures that were actually stronger than the original system. Damien's legal team had crafted a response that turned the crisis into a demonstration of the company's resilience and commitment to client protection. As the last conference call ended, Damien collapsed into his chair, running his hands through his hair. "I can't believe we pulled that off." "We make a good team," Sophia said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Yes, we do." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Sophia found herself noticing details she'd tried to ignore, the way his shirt collar was slightly wrinkled from the long day, the exhaustion in his dark eyes, the vulnerability he only showed when he thought no one was watching. "Sophia," he started, then stopped himself. "I should let you get some sleep. Thank you for today. I couldn't have managed without you." She stood to leave, pausing at the doorway. "Damien, for what it's worth, I think your grandfather would be proud of how you handled this." After she left, Damien sat alone in his office, staring out at the city lights and realizing that somewhere in the past few months, his carefully constructed emotional barriers had developed some serious cracks. The woman he'd hired to play a role had become someone he genuinely respected, someone whose opinion mattered more than any board of directors, and that terrified him more than any corporate crisis ever could. In her own room, Sophia lay awake wondering when pretending to care about Damien Cross had stopped being pretense at all. The breaking point, the photograph appeared on every major business blog simultaneously at 7:43 a.m. on a Friday morning. Sophia was making coffee when her phone began buzzing incessantly with notifications. The image showed her and Damien at last week's tech conference. But it wasn't their practiced public affection that caught attention. It was the candid moment captured between official photos, where they stood apart, checking their phones with the mechanical distance of business associates. The headline read, "Cross-Industry CEO in Sham Marriage. Sources reveal contract wedding to secure inheritance." Sophia's hands shook as she read the article, which detailed their arrangement with disturbing accuracy. Someone had leaked not just the fact of their contract marriage, but specific terms, payment amounts, and even quotes from their original agreement. "Damien," she called out, rushing toward his office. She found him already on the phone, his face carved from stone. "I don't care what it costs, find out who had access to those documents. Now." He hung up. The silence between them felt like a chasm. "How bad is it?" Sophia asked. Stock price dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. "The board is calling an emergency meeting, and my grandfather's lawyers are reviewing whether this violates the inheritance terms." He looked at her with hollow eyes. "It's over, Sophia. Everything I've worked for. There has to be something we can do." "There is." His voice was flat. "You leave immediately. We spin this as a brief marriage that didn't work out, and maybe I can salvage some credibility." The words hit her like physical blows. "You want me to go? I want to minimize the damage. Your staying will only fuel more speculation." Sophia stared at him, seeing the walls slam back into place with brutal efficiency. The man who had worked beside her through the night during the security crisis, who had laughed at her terrible jokes during their morning coffee routine, who had looked at her with something approaching tenderness that man had vanished, replaced by the cold businessman she'd first met in the coffee shop. "Fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll pack my things." But as she turned to leave, Damien's voice stopped her. "Sophia, wait, I didn't mean yes you did." She faced him again, chin raised. "You meant exactly what you said. When things get difficult, I'm expendable. I'm just an employee, right? Easily replaced, easily dismissed. That's not it is, though. You've never seen me as anything more than a solution to a problem. Well, congratulations, Damien. You've solved this problem too." An hour later, Sophia was in her old studio apartment, staring at walls that seemed to have shrunk in her absence. Her phone rang. Constantly reporters, gossip bloggers, even a few talk show producers. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the hollow ache in her chest that she refused to acknowledge as heartbreak. Meanwhile, Damien sat in his boardroom facing a circle of furious investors and board members. The emergency meeting had devolved into barely controlled chaos. "This inheritance clause was supposed to stabilize the company," growled Harrison Phillips, the longest-serving board member. "Instead, you've made us a laughingstock." "The marriage was legal," Damien said tightly. "The terms of my grandfather's will have been met. A sham marriage won't satisfy the spirit of his intentions," Phillips shot back. "He wanted you to demonstrate stability, maturity, commitment. This proves the opposite." As the meeting dragged on, Damien found his thoughts drifting to Sophia's expression when he'd asked her to leave the hurt she'd tried to hide. The dignity with which she'd accepted his dismissal. He remembered her defending him during the security crisis, the way she'd stood by him when his world was falling apart. And how had he repaid that loyalty? By throwing her away the moment she became inconvenient. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Security footage shows the leak came from Vincent Morrison's office. He had access to the contracts through his legal firm. Vincent Morrison, his biggest competitor, the man who'd been circling cross-industries like a vulture for years. The same Vincent Morrison who'd been conspicuously friendly at recent social events, asking pointed questions about Damien's marriage. Damien stood abruptly. "This meeting is adjourned." "We haven't finished," Phillips began. "Yes, we have." Damien's voice carried a finality that silenced the room. "Information, and I know why. But more importantly, I know exactly what I need to do about it." As he strode out of the boardroom, Damien felt something crystallize inside him. Clarity he hadn't experienced since his grandfather's death. For months, he'd been playing by other people's rules, trying to satisfy board members and inheritance, clauses and public expectations. But some things were more important than business. Some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost, and Sophia Blake was definitely worth fighting for. True Love Prevails, the press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. But Damien had one stop to make first. He found Sophia in the university library, surrounded by environmental engineering textbooks and looking determinedly focused on anything except the news coverage of their collapsed marriage. "We need to talk," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I think you said everything that needed saying yesterday." She didn't look up from her textbook. Besides, Shouldn't you be managing your PR crisis? That's exactly what I'm doing. Something in his tone made her finally meet his eyes. It looked different, somehow less controlled, more raw. The perfectly pressed businessman had been replaced by someone who looked like he'd spent the night wrestling with impossible decisions. Sophia, I was wrong. About everything. He leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. I asked you to leave because I was scared. Scared of losing the company, scared of disappointing people, but mostly scared of admitting that this stopped being about business months ago. Damien, let me finish. Please. He ran a hand through his hair. Yesterday, when everything fell apart, my first instinct was to protect what I thought mattered most. The company, the inheritance, the reputation I've spent years building. But last night, sitting alone in that empty penthouse, I realized I'd thrown away the only thing that actually mattered. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain steady. And what's that? You, us, whatever this has become between us. His dark eyes held hers steadily. I love you, Sophia, not as part of some contract or business arrangement. I love your brilliant mind and your terrible morning hair and the way you argue with me about everything. I love how you make that penthouse feel like home instead of just an expensive hotel room. Tears she'd been holding back since yesterday finally spilled over. You have terrible timing. You know that? I'm supposed to hate you right now. Do you? Hate me? She wanted to lie, wanted to protect what was left of her heart. Instead, she whispered, No. I love you too, you impossible man. Which makes this so much harder. It doesn't have to be hard. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Come with me to the press conference. Stand by my side not as my contract wife, but as the woman I choose to be with regardless of what anyone else thinks. An hour later, they stood together at the podium facing a room full of reporters and camera crews. Damien's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that no contract could have manufactured. Ladies and gentlemen, Damien began, his voice clear and confident. I called this conference to address the recent speculation about my marriage and my company. Yes, my relationship with Sophia began as a business arrangement. But anyone who thinks that's where it ended clearly hasn't been paying attention. He turned to look at her, and Sophia saw nothing but absolute certainty in his expression. Over the past year, I've watched this woman transform not just my home, but my entire approach to life and business. She helped save Cross Industries during our recent security crisis. She's challenged me to think differently about corporate responsibility and environmental impact. Most importantly, she's shown me that some things matter more than profit margins and board approval. Reporter shouted out, What about your grandfather's inheritance? Damien smiled. My grandfather wanted me to find stability and maturity. He wanted me to understand that real success isn't measured in stock prices alone. I believe marrying Sophia, whether it began as business or not, has taught me exactly those lessons. And the financial arrangement, another reporter pressed, was terminated months ago. Sophia spoke for the first time, stepping closer to the microphone. I'm here because I choose to be, not because of any contract. The questions continued for 20 more minutes, but the narrative had already shifted. Instead of a scandal about a fake marriage, the story became something far more compelling, a business arrangement that had evolved into genuine love. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the same penthouse, but it looked completely different. Her paintings hung on the walls, books were scattered on the coffee table, and plants filled the previously sterile space with life and warmth. Through the windows, she could see the construction site where Cross Industries was building Seattle's first carbon-neutral office complex, a project she'd helped design. Any regrets? Damien asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. About which part? Marrying you for money, or falling in love with you despite myself? Either both? Sophia leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Only one regret. What's that? That it took a scandal and a near disaster for you to realize you loved me? He turned her in his arms, his eyes serious. I promise to do better at recognizing what matters most. Good, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Because our next contract is going to be much more demanding. Next contract? She smiled. pulling a small velvet box from her pocket. Well, somebody has to propose properly this time, since you're clearly terrible at romantic timing. Damien's laughter echoed through their home, no longer his penthouse or her temporary residence, but the place they'd built together from a business arrangement that had become so much more. Some contracts, they'd learned, were meant to be broken. Others were meant to last forever.